Lucifer, Volume 2, London, June 15th, 1888, number 10. Theosophy or Jesuitism, by H.P. Blavatsky. Narration by Danny Wilton. The 13th number of Lotus, the recognized organ of Theosophy, among many articles of undeniable interest, contain one by Madame Blavatsky in reply to the Abe Roca. The eminent writer, who is certainly the most learned woman of our acquaintance, discusses the following question: has Jesus ever existed? She destroys the Christian legend in its details, at least with irrecusible texts which are not usually consulted by religious historians. This article is producing a profound sensation in the Catholic and Judeo-Catholic swamp. We are not surprised at this, for the author's arguments are such that it is difficult to break down, even were one accustomed to the Byzantine disputes of theology. Paris, Evening Paper of May 12, 1888. The series of articles, one of which is referred to in the above quotation from a well-known French evening paper, was originally called forth by an article in Les Lotus by the Abe Roca, a translation of which was published in the January number of Lucifer. These articles, it would seem, have stirred up many slumbering animosities. They appear, in particular, to have touched the Jesuit party in France somewhat nearly. Several correspondents have written calling attention to the danger incurred by Theosophists in raising up against themselves such a virulent and powerful foes. Some of our friends would have us keep silent on these topics. Such is not, however, the policy of Lucifer, nor ever will be. Therefore the present opportunity is taken to state once for all the views which Theosophists and occultists entertain with regard to the Society of Jesus. At the same time, all those who are pursuing in life's greatest wilderness of vain evanescent, pleasures and empty conventionalities, an ideal worth living for, are offered a choice between the two now once more rising powers, the Alpha and the Omega, at the two opposite ends of the realm of giddy idle existence, Theosophy and Jesuitism. For in the field of religious and intellectual pursuits, these two are the only luminaries, a good and an evil star, truly glimmering once more from behind the mists of the past and ascending on the horizon of mental activities. They are the only two powers capable in the present day of extricating one thirsty for intellectual life from the clammy slush of the stagnant pool known as modern society, so crystallized in its cant, so dreary and monotonous in its squirrel-like motion around the wheel of fashion. Theosophy and Jesuitism are the two opposite poles, one far above, the other far below even that stagnant marsh. Both offer power, one to the spiritual, the other to the psychic and intellectual ego in man. The former is the wisdom that is from above, pure, peaceable, gentle, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy, while the latter is the wisdom that descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. One is the power of light, the other the power of darkness. A question will surely be asked: why should anyone choose between the two? Cannot one remain in the world a good Christian of whatever church without gravitating to either of these poles? Most undeniably one can do so for a few years to come. But the cycle is rapidly approaching the last limit of its turning point. One out of the three great churches of Christendom is split into atomic sects whose number increases yearly, and a house is divided against itself, as is the Protestant Church, must fall. The third, the Roman Catholic, the only one that has hitherto succeeded in appearing to retain all its integrity, it's rapidly decaying from within. It is honeycombed throughout, and is being devoured by the ravenous microbes begotten by Loyola. It is no better now than a dead sea fruit, fair for some to look at, but full of the rottenness of decay and death within. The Roman Catholicism is but a name, as a church is a phantom of the past and a mask. It is absolutely and indissolubly bound up with and fettered by the society of Ignatius Loyola. For as rightly expressed by Lord Robert Montagu, the Roman Catholic Church is now the largest secret society in the world, beside which Freemasonry is but a pygmy. Protestantism is slowly, insidiously, but as surely infected with the Latinism, the new ritualistic sects of the High Church, and such men among its clergy as Father Rivington being undeniable evidence of it. In 50 years or more at the present rate of success of Latinism among the upper 10, the English aristocracy will have returned to the faith of King Charles II, and its servile copyist, mixed society, will have followed suit. And then the Jesuits will begin to reign alone and supreme over the Christian portions of the globe, for they have crept into even the Greek Church. It is vain to argue and claim a difference between Jesuitism and Roman Catholicism proper, for the latter is now sucked into and inseparably amalgamated with the former. We have public assurance for it in the Pastoral of 1876 by Bishop of Cambrai. Quote, "Clericalism, ultramontanism, and Jesuitism are one and the same thing, that is to say, Roman Catholicism, and the distinctions between them have been created by the enemies of religion," says the Pastoral. "There was a time," adds Monseigneur the Cardinal, "when a certain theological opinion was commonly professed in France concerning the authority of the Pope. It was restricted to our nation, and was of recent origin. The civil power during a century and a half imposed official instruction. Those who professed these opinions were called Gallicans, and those who protested were called Ultramontanes, because they had their doctrinal center beyond the Alps at Rome. Today, the distinction between the two schools is no longer admissible. Theological Gallicanism can no longer exist, since this opinion has ceased to be tolerated by the Church. It has been solemnly condemned past all return by the Ecumenical Council of the Vatican. One cannot now be a Catholic without being Ultramontane and Jesuit." A plain statement, as cool as it is plain. The Pastoral made a certain noise in France and in the Catholic world, but was soon forgotten. And as 2 centuries have rolled away since an exposé of the infamous principles of the Jesuits was made, of which we will speak presently, the black militia of Loyola has had ample time to lie so successfully in denying the just charges that even now, when the present Pope has brilliantly sanctioned the utterance of the Bishop of Cambrai, the Roman Catholics will hardly confess to such a thing. Strange exhibition of infallibility in the popes. The infallible Pope Clement XIV, Ganganelli, suppressed the Jesuits on the 23rd of July, 1773, and yet they came to life again. The infallible Pope Pius VII re-established them on the 7th of August in 1814. The infallible Pope Pius IX traveled during the whole of his long pontificate between the Scylla and Charybdis of the Jesuit question, his infallibility helping him very little. And now the infallible Leo XIII, fatal figures, raises the Jesuits again to the highest pinnacle of their sinister and graceless glory. The recent brevet of the Pope, hardly 2 years old, dated July 13th, the same fatal figure in 1886, is an event the importance of which can be never overvalued. It begins with the words "Dolemus inter alia," and reinstalls the Jesuits in all the rights of the order that had ever been cancelled. It was a manifesto and a loud defiant insult to all the Christian nations of the New and Old worlds. From an article by Louis Lambert in the Gaulois, August 18, 1886, we learn that, quote, "In 1750 there were 40,000 Jesuits all over the world. In 1800, officially they were reckoned at about 1,000 men only. In 1886, they numbered between 7,000 and 8,000, end quote. This last modest number can well be doubted, for verily now, where you meet a man believing in the salutary nature of falsehoods, or the divine authority of things doubtful, and fancying to serve the good cause he must call the devil to his aid, there is a follower of the unsaint Ignatius, says Carlyle, and adds of that black militia of Ignatius that, quote, they have given a new substantive to modern languages. The word Jesuitism now in all countries expresses an idea for which there was in nature no prototype before. Not till these last centuries had the human soul generated that abomination, or needed to name it. Truly, they have achieved great things in the world, and a great general result that we may all call stupendous. And now, since their reinstallment in Germany and elsewhere, they will achieve still grander and more stupendous results. For the future can be read by the past. Unfortunately, in this year of the Pope's Jubilee, the civilized portions of humanity, even the Protestant ones, seem to have entirely forgotten the past. Let then those who profess to despise Theosophy, the fair child of early Arian thought and Alexandrian Neoplatonism, bow before the monstrous fiend of the age. But let them not forget at the same time its history. It is curious to observe how persistently the order has assailed everything like occultism from the earliest times, and Theosophy since the foundation of its last society, which is ours. The Moors and the Jews of Spain felt the weight of the oppressive hand of obscurantism, no less than did the Kabbalists and alchemists of the Middle Ages. One would think esoteric philosophy, and especially the occult arts, or magic, were an abomination to these good holy fathers. And so indeed they would have the world believe. But when one studies history, and the works of their own authors, published with the imprimatur of the order, what does one find? That the Jesuits have practiced not only occultism, but black magic in its worst form, more than any other body of men, and that to it they owe in large measure their power and influence. To refresh the memory of our readers, and all those whom it may concern, a short summary of the doings and actings of our good friends may be once more attempted. For those who are inclined to laugh, and deny the subterranean and truly infernal means used by Ignatius' black militia, we may state facts. In Isis Unveiled, it was said of this holy fraternity that, quote, though established only in 1535 to 1540, in 1555 there was already a general outcry raised against them, end quote. And now once more, that crafty, learned, conscienceless, terrible soul of Jesuitism within the body of Romanism is slowly but surely possessing itself of the whole prestige and spiritual power that clings to it. Throughout antiquity, where, in what land can we find anything like this order or anything even approaching it? The cry of an outraged public morality was raised against it from its very birth. Barely 15 years had elapsed after the bull approving its constitution was promulgated, when its members began to be driven away from one place to the other. Portugal and the Low Countries got rid of them in 1578, France in 1594, Venice in 1606, Naples in 1622. From St. Petersburg they were expelled in 1815, and from all Russia in 1820. The writer begs to remark to the readers that this, which was written in 1875, applies admirably and with still more force in 1888. Also that the statements that follow in quotation marks may all be verified. And thirdly, that the principles of the Jesuits that are now brought forward are extracted from authenticated MSS, or folios printed by various members themselves of this very distinguished body. Therefore, they can be checked and verified in the British Museum and Bodleian Library with still more ease than in our works. Many are copied from the large quarto, published by the authority of, and verified and collated by, the commissioners of the French Parliament. The statements therein were collected and presented to the King in order that, as the Arrêt du Parlement du March 1762 expresses it, the elder son of the Church might be made aware of the perversity of this doctrine, a doctrine authorizing theft, lying, perjury, impurity, every passion and crime, teaching homicide, parricide, and regicide, overthrowing religion in order to substitute it for superstition by favoring sorcery, blasphemy, irreligion, and idolatry, etc. Let us then examine the ideas on magic of the Jesuits, that magic which they are pleased to call devilish and satanic when studied by the Theosophists. Writing on the subject in his secret instructions, Anthony Escobar says, quote, "It is lawful to make use of the science acquired through the assistance of the devil, provided the preservation and use of that knowledge do not depend upon the devil, for the knowledge is good in itself, and the sin by which it was acquired has gone by." End quote. True. Why should not a Jesuit cheat the devil as well as he cheats every layman? Quote, "Astrologers and soothsayers are either bound or not bound to restore the reward of their divination. If the event does not come to pass, I own," remarks the good Father Escobar, "that the former opinion does not at all please me, because when the astrologer or diviner has exerted all the diligence in the diabolical art which is essential to his purpose, he has fulfilled his duty, whatever may be the result. As the physician, it is not bound to restore his fee. If the patient should die, so neither is the astrologer bound to restore his charge, except where he has used no effort, or was ignorant of his diabolical art, because when he has used his endeavors, he is not deceived." Buzenbaum and Lacroix in Theologia Moralis say, quote, "Palmistry may be considered lawful, if from the lines and divisions of the hands it can ascertain the disposition of the body, and conjecture with probability the propensities and affections of the soul." End quote. This noble fraternity, which many preachers have of late so vehemently denied to have ever been a secret one, has been sufficiently proved to be such. Its constitutions were translated into Latin by the Jesuit Paulincus and printed in the College of the Society of Rome in 1558. Quote, "They were jealously kept secret, the greater part of the Jesuits themselves knowing only extracts from them. They were never produced to light until 1761, when they were published by the order of the French Parliament in 1761 and 1762, in the famous process of Father Lavalette. The Jesuits reckon it among the greatest achievements of their order that Loyola supported, by a special memorial to the Pope, a petition for the reorganization of that abominable and aberrant instrument of wholesale butchery, the infamous tribunal of the Inquisition. This order of Jesuits is now all-powerful in Rome. They have been reinstalled in the Congregation of Extraordinary Ecclesiastical Affairs, in the Department of the Secretary of the State, and in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The pontifical government was for years previous to Victor Emmanuel's occupation of Rome entirely in their hands. What was the origin of that order? It may be stated in a few words. In the year 1534, on August 16th, an ex-officer and knight of the Virgin from the Biscayan provinces and the proprietor of the magnificent castle of Casa Solar, Ignatius Loyola, became the hero of the following incident. In the subterranean chapel of the church Montmartre, surrounded by a few priests and students of theology, he received their pledges to devote their whole lives to the spreading of Roman Catholicism by every and all means, whether good or foul. And he was thus enabled to establish a new order. Loyola proposed to his 6 chief companions that their order should be a militant one in order to fight for the interests of the holy seat of the Roman Catholicism. 2 means were adopted to make the object answer: the education of youth and proselytism. This was during the reign of Pope Paul III, who gave his full sympathy to the new scheme. Hence, in 1540 was published the famous papal bull, Regimini Militantis Ecclesiae, the regiment of the warring or militant church, after which the order began increasing rapidly in numbers and power. At the death of Loyola, The society counted more than 1,000 Jesuits, though admission into the ranks was, as alleged, surrounded with extraordinary difficulties. It was another celebrated and unprecedented bull, issued by Pope Julius III in 1552, that brought the Order of Jesus to such eminence and helped it towards such rapid increase. For it placed the society outside and beyond the jurisdiction of local ecclesiastical authority, granted the order its own laws, and permitted it to recognize but one supreme authority, that of its general, whose residence was then at Rome. The results of such an arrangement proved fatal to the secular church. High prelates and cardinals had very often to tremble before a simple subordinate of the Society of Jesus. Its generals always got the upper hand in Rome, and enjoyed the unlimited confidence of the popes, who thus frequently became tools in the hands of the order. Naturally enough, in those days when political power was one of the rights of the vicegerents of God, the strength of the crafty society became simply tremendous. In the name of the popes, the Jesuits thus granted to themselves unheard-of privileges, which they enjoyed unstintedly up to the year 1772. In that year, Pope Clement XIV published a new bull, Dominus ac Redemptor, the Lord and Redeemer, abolishing the famous order. But the popes proved helpless before this new Frankenstein, the fiend that one of the vicars of God had evoked. The society continued its existence secretly, notwithstanding the persecutions of both popes and the lay authorities of every country. In 1801, under the new alias of the Congregation of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, it had already penetrated into and was tolerated in Russia and Sicily. In 1814, as already said, a new bull of Pius VII resurrected the Order of Jesus. Through its late privileges, even those among the lay clergy were withheld from it. The lay authorities in France, as elsewhere, have found themselves compelled ever since to tolerate and to count with the Jesuits. All that they could do was to deny them any special privileges and subject the members of that society to the laws of the country, equally with other ecclesiastics. But, gradually and imperceptibly, the Jesuits succeeded in obtaining special favors even from the lay authorities. Napoleon III granted them permission to open 7 colleges in Paris only for the education of the young, the only condition exacted being that these colleges should be under the authority and supervision of local bishops. But the establishments had hardly been opened when the Jesuits broke that rule. The episode with Archbishop Darbe is well known. Desiring to visit the Jesuit college in Rue de la Poste, Paris, he was refused admittance, and the gates were closed against him by the order of the superior. The bishop lodged a complaint to the Vatican, but the answer was delayed for such a length of time that the Jesuits remained virtually masters of the situation and outside of every jurisdiction but their own. And now read what Lord R. Montague says of their deeds in Protestant England and judge. Quote, "The Jesuit society, with its nihilist adherents in Russia, its socialist allies in Germany, its Fenians and nationalists in Ireland, its accomplices and slaves in its power, think of that society which has not scrupled to stir up the most bloody wars between nations in order to advance its purposes, and yet can stoop to hunting down a single man because he knows their secret and will not be his slave. Think of a society which can devise such a diabolical scheme and then boast of it, and say whether a desperate energy is not required in us. If you've been behind the scenes, then you would still have before you the labor of unraveling all that is being done by our government, and of tearing off the tissue of lies by which their acts are concealed. Repeated attempts will have taught you that there is not a public man on whom you can lean. Because as England is between the upper and nether millstone, none but adherents or slaves are now advanced, and it stands to reason that the Jesuits, who have got that far, have prepared new millstones for the time when the present ones shall have passed away, and then again younger millstones to come on after and wield the power of the nation. In France, the affairs of the sons of Loyola flourished to the day when the ministry of Jules Ferry compelled them to retire from the field of battle. Many are those who still remember the useless strictness of the police measures and the clever enacting of dramatic scenes by the Jesuits themselves. This only added to their popularity with certain classes. They obtained thereby an aureole of martyrdom, and the sympathy of every pious and foolish woman in the land was secured to them. And now that Pope Leo XIII has once more restored to the good fathers, the Jesuits, all the privileges and rights that had ever been granted to their predecessors, what can the public at large of Europe and America expect? Judging by the bull, the complete mastery, moral and physical, over every land where there are Roman Catholics, is secured to the black militia. For in this bull the Pope confesses that of all religious congregations now existing, that of the Jesuits is the dearest to its heart. He lacks words sufficiently expressive to show the ardent love he, Pope Leo, feels for them, etc., etc. Thus they have the certitude of the support of the Vatican in all and everything. And as it is, they who guide him, we see His Holiness coquetting and flirting with every great European potentate, from Bismarck down to the crowned heads of continent and isle. In view of the ever-increasing influence of Leo XIII, moral and political, such a certitude for the Jesuits is of no mean importance. Meanwhile, let us remember the words of warning received of one of our late Theosophists, Dr. Kenneth Mackenzie, who, speaking of the Jesuits, says that, quote, "Their spies are everywhere, of all apparent ranks of society, and they may appear learned and wise, or simple and foolish, as their instructions run. There are Jesuits of both sexes and of all ages, and it is a well-known fact that members of the order, of high family and delicate nurture, are acting as menial servants in Protestant families, and doing other things of a similar nature in aid of the Society's purposes. We cannot be too much on our guard, for the whole society, being founded on a law of unhesitating obedience, can bring its force to bear on any given point with unerring and fatal accuracy." The Jesuits maintain that, quote, "The Society of Jesus is not of human invention, but it proceeded from Him whose name it bears, for Jesus Himself described that rule of life which society follows first by His example and afterwards by His words." End quote. Let then all pious Christians listen and acquaint themselves with this alleged rule of life and precepts of their God as exemplified by the Jesuits. Peter Alagona says, quote, "By the command of God, it is lawful to kill an innocent person, to steal or commit fornication, because He is the Lord of life and death and all things, and it is due to Him to fulfill His command." Quote, "A man of religious order, who for a short time lays aside his habit for a sinful purpose, is free from heinous sin, and does not incur the penalty of excommunication." End quote. John Baptist Taberna, Synopsis Theologiae Practica, propounds the following question, quote, "Is a judge bound to restore the bribe which he has received for passing sentence?" End quote. Answer, quote, "If he has received the bribe for passing an unjust sentence, it is probable that he may keep it. This opinion is maintained and defended by the 58 doctors, or Jesuits. We must abstain at present from proceeding further. So disgustingly licentious, hypocritical, and demoralizing are nearly all of these precepts that it was found impossible to put any of them in print except in the Latin language. But what are we to think of the future of society if it is to be controlled in word and deed by this villainous body? What are we to expect from a public which, knowing the existence of the above-mentioned charges, and that they are not exaggerated but pertain to historical fact, still tolerates, when it does not reverence, the Jesuits on meeting them, while it is ever ready to point the finger of contempt at theosophists and occultists? Theosophy is persecuted with unmerited slander and ridicule at the instigation of these same Jesuits, and many are those who hardly dare to confess their belief in the philosophy of arhatship. Yet no theosophical society has ever threatened the public with moral decay and the full and free exercise of the 7 capital sins under the mask of holiness and the guidance of Jesus. Nor are their rules secret, but open to all, for they live in the broad daylight of truth and sincerity. And how about the Jesuits in this respect? Jesuits who belong to the highest category, says Louis Lambert, have full and absolute liberty of action, even to murder and arson. On the other hand, those Jesuits who are found guilty of the slightest attempt to endanger or compromise the Society of Jesus are punished mercilessly. They are allowed to write the most heretical books, provided they do not expose the secrets of the order. And these secrets are undeniably of a most terrible and dangerous nature. Compare a few of these Christian precepts and rules for entering this society of divine origin, as claimed for it with the laws that regulated admissions to the secret societies of the temple mysteries of the pagans. Quote, "A brother Jesuit has the right to kill anyone that may prove dangerous to Jesuitism." End quote. Christian and Catholic sons, says Stephen Fagundes, may accuse their fathers of the crime of heresy if they wish to turn them from the faith, although they may know that their parents will be burned with fire and put to death for it, as Tolle teaches. And not only may they refuse them food, but they may also be justly killed. It is well known to Nero, the emperor, had never dared to seek initiation into the pagan mysteries on account of the murder of Agrippina. Under section 14 of the Principles of the Jesuits, we find on homicide the following Christian ethics inculcated by Father Henry Henriquez in Summa Theologiae Moralis. Quote, "If an adulterer, even though he should be an ecclesiastic, being attacked by the husband, kills the aggressor, he is not considered irregular." Quote, "If a father were obnoxious to the state, that is, being in banishment, and to the society at large, and there were no other means of averting such injury, then I should approve of this, for a son to kill his father," says section 15 on parricide and homicide. Quote, "It will be lawful for an ecclesiastic or one of the religious order to kill a calumniator who threatens to spread atrocious accusations against himself or his religion, is the rule set forth by Jesuit Francis Amicus. One of the most unconquerable obstacles to initiation with the Egyptians as with the Greeks was any degree of murder, or even of simple unchastity. It is these enemies of the human race, they are called, that have once more obtained their old privileges of working in the dark and inveigling and destroying every obstacle they find in their way with absolute impunity. But, forewarned, forearmed, students of occultism should know that while the Jesuits have, by their devices, contrived to make the world in general, and Englishmen in particular, think there is no such thing as magic, these astute and wily schemers themselves hold magnetic circles and form magnetic chains by the consecration of their collective will when they have any special object to effect or any particular important person to influence. Again, they use their riches lavishly to help them in any project. Their wealth is enormous. When recently expelled from France, they brought so much money with them, some part of which they converted into English funds, that immediately the latter were raised to par, which the Daily Telegraph pointed out at the time. They have succeeded. The Church is henceforth an inert tool, and the Pope a poor weak instrument in the hands of this order. But for how long? The day may come when their wealth be violently taken from them, and they themselves mercilessly destroyed amidst the general execrations and applause of all nations and peoples. There is a nemesis, a karma, though often it allows evil and sin to go on successively for ages. It is also a vain attempt on their part to threaten the Theosophists, their implacable enemies. For the latter are, perhaps, the only body in the whole world who need not fear them. They may try, and perhaps succeed in crushing individual members. They would try vainly in their hands, strong and powerful as it may be, in an attack on the society. Theosophists are as well protected and better than themselves. To the man of modern science, to all those who know nothing and do not believe what they hear of white and black magic, the above will read like nonsense. Let it be, though Europe will very soon experience, and is already so experiencing, the heavy hand of the latter. Theosophists are slandered and reviled by the Jesuits and their adherents everywhere. They are charged with idolatry and superstition, and yet we read in the same Principles of the Father Jesuits, quote, "The more true opinion is that all inanimate, irrational things may be legitimately worshipped," says Father Gabriel Vasquez, treating of idolatry. Quote, "If the doctrine which we have established be rightly understood, not only may a painted image and every holy thing set forth by public authority be properly adored with God as the image of himself, but also any other thing of this world, whether it be inanimate and irrational, or in its nature rational." This is Roman Catholicism, identical and henceforth one with Jesuitism, as shown by the pastoral of the Cardinal Bishop of Cambrai and Pope Leo, a precept this, which, whether or not doing honor to the Christian Church, may at least be profitably quoted by any Hindu, Japanese, or any other heathen theosophist, who has not yet given up the belief of his childhood. But we must close. There is a prophecy in the heathen East about the Christian West, which, when rendered into comprehensible English, reads thus, quote, "When the conquerors of all the ancient nations are in their turn conquered by an army of black dragons, begotten by their sins and born of decay, then the hour of liberation for the former will strike." End quote. Easy to see who are the black dragons, and these will in turn see their power arrested and forcibly put to an end by the liberated legions. Then perhaps there will be a new invasion of an Attila from Far East. One day, the millions of China and Mongolia, heathen and Muslims, furnished with every murderous weapon invented by civilization and forced upon the celestial East by the infernal spirit of trade and love of monetary gain of the West, drilled moreover to perfection by Christian manslayers, will pour into and invade decaying Europe like an irrepressible torrent. This will be the result and work of the Jesuits, who will be its first victims. Let us hope.